We've all been there, stuck, replaying the same question in our minds. What should I do? What's the right choice? What if I regret it later? Decision making can feel paralyzing, especially when emotions are high or the stakes are meaningful. But here's the truth: making decisions doesn't have to be draining. In fact, with the right framework, you can move from confusion to clarity in less than 30 minutes. Today, I want to share with you a step-by-step process to stop struggling with choices and start making confident decisions. When you're faced with a decision, your first instinct is often to rush toward an answer, but that rush is usually fueled by panic, fear, or anxiety. The brain senses uncertainty as a kind of threat, and it kicks your stress response into gear. Your heart may race, your thoughts scatter, and your emotions climb higher. This makes the situation feel urgent, even when it may not actually require immediate action. That's why the very first step in making any decision is to deliberately pause and interrupt that wave of panic. Without this pause, you'll likely choose based on impulse rather than clarity, and impulse often leads to regret. The pause isn't about procrastinating or avoiding the decision. It's about giving yourself the chance to reset. Think of it as cleaning the lens before trying to see clearly through it. You don't need hours of meditation or an elaborate routine. Even a few intentional minutes of slowing your breathing and reminding yourself that the decision is safe to think through can change how your mind approaches the problem. This is a moment to separate yourself from the emotional chaos long enough to make space for rational thought. When you give yourself this breathing room, your nervous system begins to settle. Instead of reacting with fight or flight intensity, your body starts to calm down. With every slow inhale and exhale, you are sending a signal to your brain that you are not in danger, that you can take your time, and that you're capable of finding an answer. Many people underestimate how much physiological calm impacts mental clarity, but the two are deeply connected. A calm body leads to a calm mind, and a calm mind makes better choices. This step is especially important if you've been carrying stress from other parts of your life. Decisions made under pressure are rarely your best decisions because your brain is already overloaded. Imagine trying to solve a puzzle while people are shouting at you. That's essentially what happens when you try to make a decision in a state of panic. By pressing pause, you are creating silence in that room so you can actually see the pieces and where they fit. Sometimes the panic doesn't come just from the decision itself, but from the imagined consequences. You start spiraling: what if I choose wrong? What if I regret this? What if it ruins everything? These thoughts magnify the fear and make the choice seem much bigger than it really is. By pausing, you catch yourself before sliding too deep into that spiral. You give yourself the power to notice those catastrophic thoughts, acknowledge them, and let them pass instead of letting them control you. Another benefit of pausing is that it protects you from other people's urgency. Friends, coworkers, or family may push you to decide quickly, but just because something feels urgent to them doesn't mean it has to be urgent to you. Taking that pause allows you to reclaim your space, your timing, and your perspective. It reinforces the idea that the decision is yours to make, and you don't have to operate on anyone else's emotional timeline. During the pause, it helps to ground yourself in the present moment. Instead of letting your mind race ahead to 100 possible outcomes, bring your awareness back to right now. Notice where you are, how you feel physically, and what's happening in the environment around you. This anchoring practice keeps you from drifting too far into what ifs and brings your attention back to what you can actually control in the moment: your breath, your thoughts, and your focus. Some people find it useful to create a small ritual around pausing. It could be stepping outside for fresh air, drinking a glass of water slowly, or even writing a single sentence in a notebook that says, "I have time to think this through." The ritual doesn't matter as much as the signal it sends to your brain. You're moving from reaction to reflection. This intentional shift allows you to access parts of your brain that are focused on problem solving rather than fear. It's also worth remembering that panic thrives in silence and secrecy. When your thoughts are swirling inside your head without release, they multiply and intensify. Pausing gives you the opportunity to externalize them in a healthy way. Talking them out briefly with a trusted person or writing them down on paper can help diffuse their intensity. Once they're out of your head, they lose some of their power, and you can examine them more objectively. Most importantly, the pause teaches you that decisions are not emergencies. They are opportunities to choose to align and to grow. When you treat them as life or death moments, you create unnecessary suffering. When you pause and calm yourself, you recognize that the majority of decisions in life are reversible, adaptable, and part of a larger journey. This shift alone takes tremendous pressure off your shoulders and opens the door for more confident choices. Defining the real question is one of the most overlooked but most powerful parts of decision making. People often get stuck not because they don't have enough answers, but because they're not sure what they're actually trying to answer. The mind gets tangled in a web of possibilities, details, and side issues, and before long, it feels like you're solving 10 problems at once instead of one. This is why it's so important to pause and ask yourself, what exactly is the decision I need to make here? Stripping away the noise and narrowing the focus changes the entire process. Often, when someone says they're struggling with a decision, they're actually struggling with the emotions around the decision, not the decision itself. Fear of failure, desire to please others, or guilt about what might happen if they say no. These emotional layers disguise themselves as part of the question, but they aren't. By defining the real question, you start peeling back those layers and identifying the true choice at the center. This clarity gives you direction, like wiping condensation off a foggy mirror, so you can finally see your reflection. Sometimes the real question is far simpler than what you've been obsessing over. For example, you may think you're deciding whether to take a new job, but the real question is, do I value growth more than comfort right now? Or maybe you believe you're choosing whether to continue a relationship, but the deeper question is, am I willing to keep investing in something that doesn't align with my needs? When you uncover the real question, the options stop multiplying endlessly and the decision becomes manageable. Defining the question also forces you to recognize what's in your control versus what isn't. Many times we attach our decisions to outcomes that are uncertain or depend on other people's actions. That creates frustration because you can't control those external pieces. The real decision usually lies in your own actions and boundaries, not in the uncontrollable. By reframing the choice into something you can decide, you reduce the feeling of powerlessness and take ownership of your role. Another reason we struggle is that we sometimes mistake side issues for the main issue. You might think you're deciding whether to move to a new city, but what's really bothering you is the fear of leaving your social circle. You might think you're deciding whether to spend money on something, but what you're really wrestling with is your relationship to security. Without naming the real question, you risk solving the wrong problem and still feeling dissatisfied afterward. To get to the heart of the real question, it helps to keep asking yourself why. Why does this matter? Why am I hesitant? Why do I feel torn? Each answer you give can be challenged with another why, and eventually you uncover the root of the decision. This is a process of self-interviewing, of digging beneath the surface until the vague confusion turns into a precise question that you can actually work with. The real question also ties back to your priorities and values. Every decision carries an underlying message about what matters most to you in that moment. When you define the question clearly, you also expose which priorities are at stake. This doesn't mean one value is always better than another, but it does mean you can't make a decision that honors everything equally. Recognizing which value carries more weight in the current context is a key step in resolving indecision. It's not uncommon for people to realize that what they thought was a single big decision is actually multiple smaller decisions hiding underneath. By defining the real question, you can separate them. Instead of asking, should I change my career? You might discover that you actually need to decide first whether to pursue training, then whether to test the waters with part-time work, and only later whether to fully commit. Breaking the question down into manageable pieces reduces overwhelm and helps you focus on what matters right now. Sometimes defining the real question reveals that there isn't even a decision to make yet. You might feel pressured to act before you have the necessary information, and that premature urgency fuels anxiety. Clarifying the question can show you that the true decision at this stage is not what choice to make, but what information do I need to gather before choosing. This realization shifts the weight off your shoulders and gives you permission to step back until you're better prepared. Defining the real question isn't always comfortable because it strips away excuses and forces you to face what's actually going on. It's easier to stay stuck in confusion than to admit that the choice you're facing is really about courage, honesty, or letting go of something safe. But that discomfort is the path to clarity. When you finally articulate the decision in its truest form, you give yourself the gift of direction. And without direction, every other step in decision making becomes far more complicated than it needs to be. When it comes to making choices, one of the most liberating steps you can take is to put every possible option down on paper without judgment. Too often, decisions stay tangled in our minds because we're juggling ideas internally, half-formed and unspoken. The brain isn't designed to hold multiple competing possibilities at once for long periods. It becomes overloaded, and that mental clutter creates even more confusion. Writing them out releases the pressure, turning swirling thoughts into something tangible you can see and work with. This process works best when you resist the urge to filter. At first, you might feel silly listing options that seem unrealistic or even extreme, but that's exactly the point. By capturing everything, you clear space in your mind and allow possibilities to exist outside of your imagination. You may be surprised how seeing all the options laid out shifts your perspective. Sometimes the choice that seemed unthinkable becomes less intimidating, while the one that seemed obvious starts to show its weaknesses. Listing options without judgment is also a way of separating yourself from perfectionism. Many people stall in decision making because they're trying to land on the single, right answer before even giving themselves permission to brainstorm alternatives. This mindset creates pressure and narrows your creativity. When you let go of that restriction, you open the door for fresh thinking. The goal here is not to commit, but simply to acknowledge every path you could take, even if it feels unlikely. Once the list is on paper, you can begin examining each option in a structured way rather than letting them all swirl together in your head. One helpful approach is to ask the same 3 questions for each. What's the best that could happen? What's the worst that could happen? And can I live with the worst outcome? These questions shift the focus from vague fears to concrete realities. They help you see beyond your imagination's catastrophes and evaluate the true weight of each choice. This step also reduces the tendency to exaggerate the stakes. When everything is stuck in your mind, minor options can feel just as heavy as major ones because they all occupy the same mental space. By listing them, you start to see which options are truly viable and which ones are simply passing thoughts. The process naturally sorts what deserves serious consideration from what can be dismissed, but you only discover that distinction by laying it all out first. Another benefit of writing options is that it uncovers hidden patterns. When you look at your list, you might notice that several options are variations of the same theme, all pointing toward a particular value or desire. This insight wouldn't be as obvious if you kept them swirling in your head. Recognizing those patterns gives you more clarity about what you're really seeking, and it can guide you toward the direction that aligns most closely with your underlying goals. People often underestimate how powerful it is to externalize thoughts in this way. The act of transferring them from your head to the page creates psychological distance. It's as if you're moving from being trapped inside the maze to standing above it, where you can see all the possible routes. This shift doesn't make the decision for you, but it puts you in a position of greater control. It's the difference between reacting blindly and analyzing with perspective. It's also important to remember that judgment at this stage only hinders the process. If you dismiss certain options too early because they seem unrealistic, you might miss the chance to combine pieces of them into a creative solution. Sometimes the best choice is not one single option on your list, but a hybrid that emerges when you consider them all without bias. Giving yourself freedom to explore allows those connections to surface naturally. Listing options without judgment is especially valuable when emotions are high. Fear and doubt can make you feel like you have no choices at all, that you're boxed into one inevitable outcome. Writing out even the options you initially resist reminds you that you always have agency. Even if some paths are difficult, they still exist, and recognizing that existence can restore a sense of empowerment. What you're doing in this step is building the foundation for clarity. It may feel simple to just write down possibilities, but it's one of the most transformative moves in decision making. By externalizing your thoughts, you're reducing chaos, opening your creativity, and giving yourself the raw material you need to analyze, compare, and eventually move forward with confidence. Filtering your choices through your core values is what transforms decision making from a stressful guessing game into a meaningful process. Every option you consider carries a set of potential benefits and risks, but not all benefits and risks are equally important to you. What makes them matter is how they connect with your values, the principles that define who you are, and what you want your life to stand for. Without this filter, you risk making choices that look good on the surface, but leave you feeling disconnected, unfulfilled, or even resentful. Aligning with values gives decisions a deeper anchor, something more enduring than short-term emotions or pressures. When you pause to evaluate options through the lens of values, you shift from asking what looks safest or what looks easiest to asking what reflects what I believe in. This is a profound difference. Many of the regrets people carry come from making choices that went against their own principles in order to satisfy external expectations. You may take the job everyone else thinks is impressive, but if it violates your value of balance or freedom, it will drain you. You may stay in a relationship to avoid disappointing others, but if it collides with your value of honesty, you'll eventually feel suffocated. Filtering through values protects you from those quiet, lingering regrets. To begin this process, it's important to know what your core values are. They aren't just ideals like kindness or success. They are the qualities that consistently matter to you in how you live and choose. For some, it might be growth, authenticity, or stability. For others, it could be family, creativity, or independence. Identifying them requires honest reflection, but once you do, they become a compass that you can return to again and again. Every decision, big or small, can be checked against whether it honors those values or undermines them. Looking at decisions through this lens often simplifies what feels complicated. When you're torn between two seemingly equal options, values act as the tiebreaker. For example, if one path offers higher pay but less freedom, and another offers moderate pay but more autonomy, the right answer emerges when you ask which value matters more to you right now, financial security or independence. Without this filter, you may feel endlessly conflicted, but values reduce the noise and highlight what truly matters. Filtering through values also helps distinguish between fear-based choices and growth-based choices. Fear pushes you to choose the option that avoids discomfort, risk, or judgment. Growth, on the other hand, nudges you toward options that may be harder in the short term but align with your higher goals. By asking yourself whether a decision reflects your values, you can spot when fear is disguising itself as wisdom. Often, the option that feels scary but resonates with your values is the one that leads to long-term fulfillment, while the safe option leads to stagnation. One of the most practical ways to apply this is by projecting forward. Ask yourself, 10 years from now, will I be proud of this choice? Will it still align with who I am and what I stand for? This exercise removes you from the urgency of the present moment and allows you to view the decision through a broader perspective. When seen through the lens of time, many choices that feel tempting in the moment lose their appeal because they don't serve your values in the long run. This kind of filtering also gives you confidence when others question your choices. If you know you made a decision that reflects your deepest principles, you won't be as shaken by outside opinions. Even if others don't understand, you can stand firmly in your reasoning. That's the strength values provide. They ground you in an internal standard rather than leaving you swayed by the changing winds of other people's approval or disapproval. It's worth noting that filtering through values doesn't always make decisions easier in the sense of removing discomfort. In fact, it can make them harder at first because it may push you toward the option that requires more courage or sacrifice. But what it does is make the decision clearer. You may still feel nervous or challenged, but you'll know why you're choosing what you're choosing, and that clarity reduces the second guessing that eats away at peace of mind. Another important aspect of this process is that values can shift in priority depending on the season of your life. At one stage, career growth might outweigh stability, while later stability might become more central. Filtering decisions through values isn't about locking yourself into one rigid hierarchy forever. It's about being honest about what matters most right now. When you stay in tune with that, your decisions evolve alongside you, reflecting your current reality rather than an outdated version of yourself. The act of aligning choices with values ultimately transforms decision making into an act of self-respect. Instead of letting fear, pressure, or convenience dictate your path, you choose in a way that honors the life you want to live. This doesn't guarantee that every outcome will be perfect, but it does ensure that the process reflects integrity, clarity, and authenticity. That is what removes the burden of regret and makes decision-making feel empowering rather than exhausting. Making the choice and releasing it is often the part people fear the most, yet it's the moment where all the work you've done finally comes together. Up until this point, you've calmed your mind, clarified the real question, explored your options, and filtered them through your values. But the truth is, none of that matters if you never actually make the decision. Many people hover endlessly in the space of preparation, hoping that certainty will somehow appear if they just think long enough. The reality is that certainty rarely comes before action. It grows after you decide and start moving forward. When you reach the stage of making the choice, it's essential to remind yourself that most decisions are not permanent. They can be adjusted, refined, or even reversed as you gather new information and experiences. The fear of finality is what keeps people frozen, but in reality, very few decisions in life are truly irreversible. By reframing the act of choosing as a step in an ongoing process rather than a one-time permanent lock, you remove much of the unnecessary weight from your shoulders. Another reason people hesitate at this stage is the obsession with finding the perfect decision. Perfectionism convinces you that there is one flawless path, and if you don't find it, you'll regret your choice forever. This mindset is paralyzing because it holds you to an impossible standard. What you really need is not the perfect decision, but the best decision you can make with the information you have right now. That shift in thinking frees you from endless searching and allows you to move into action with confidence. Once you've chosen, releasing the decision is just as important as making it. This means letting go of the constant mental replay of, what if I had chosen differently? That inner dialogue steals energy and robs you of peace. Every time you revisit the other options in your mind, you weaken your commitment to the path you're on. Releasing is an act of trust, trusting yourself, trusting your process, and trusting that whatever comes, you are capable of handling it. Releasing also means refusing to chase after external validation. After making a decision, it's natural to want reassurance from others, but seeking too much outside approval can pull you back into doubt. People will always have opinions, and those opinions may conflict. If you try to satisfy everyone, you'll end up questioning yourself again. Instead, grounding yourself in the reasons behind your choice, the values, the reflection, the clarity you worked through, keeps you steady even when others don't understand. Sometimes releasing requires creating boundaries around your own thoughts. You may need to actively redirect your focus when your mind starts revisiting the what ifs. This might mean telling yourself, I've already decided, and now I'm moving forward, or intentionally shifting your attention to the next action you need to take. The more you practice this mental discipline, the less power doubt has over you. Over time, your brain learns that once a decision is made, it's not useful to keep reopening it. There's also a freedom that comes with release, a lightness you can feel when you no longer carry the burden of indecision. Indecision is heavy, it drains your energy, clutters your thoughts, and creates a sense of being stuck. The act of committing clears away that weight. Even if challenges arise after your choice, you'll face them with more focus because you're no longer split between multiple possibilities. That single-minded energy allows you to give your full attention to making the most of the path you've chosen. Another powerful part of releasing is recognizing that every decision holds lessons. Even if the outcome isn't what you hoped for, the choice teaches you something valuable about yourself, your priorities, and your resilience. When you see decisions as opportunities for growth rather than tests you must pass perfectly, the fear of making the wrong choice begins to lose its grip. Each decision becomes a stepping stone rather than a potential trap, and that perspective makes releasing much easier. It's also important to acknowledge that releasing doesn't mean you stop caring about the outcome. It means you stop obsessing over whether the decision was correct and instead focus your energy on what you can build from it. You shift from a backward-looking stance, analyzing endlessly, into a forward-looking stance where you pour your time and energy into shaping the results. This proactive orientation empowers you to create success instead of passively waiting for it. Ultimately, making the choice and releasing it is about stepping into ownership of your life. No one else can live with your choices the way you do, and no one else can walk your path. When you decide and release, you declare that you are willing to take responsibility for the direction you're heading. It's a declaration of agency, courage, and self-trust, and it's what transforms decision-making from a source of fear into a source of strength. There's a powerful shift that happens once you understand that there is rarely a single right decision, only the one you choose and commit to. Many people spend countless hours tormenting themselves with the idea that there is a perfect path hidden somewhere, and if they don't find it, everything will fall apart. This illusion of a flawless choice keeps them stuck, second-guessing every possibility and doubting their own ability to choose wisely. In reality, life is far less rigid. What matters most is not uncovering one magical answer, but deciding, moving forward, and shaping the path as you walk it. The belief in one perfect choice creates an enormous amount of pressure. It makes you approach every decision as if it carries the weight of your entire future, when most choices are simply steps that lead to more steps. Even significant decisions like a career move or a relationship commitment are not absolute endpoints. They are beginnings that open doors to new experiences. When you release the idea of perfection, you allow yourself to make choices with more confidence and less fear, knowing that any decision can be a building block rather than a final verdict. Confidence comes not from finding the right answer, but from committing to the answer you've chosen. This means fully investing yourself in making that choice work rather than constantly wondering about the alternatives you left behind. When you commit your energy, attention, and creativity focus in one direction, and that focus is what produces results. When you refuse to commit, you scatter your energy across regrets, what-ifs, and imagined scenarios, leaving yourself drained and paralyzed. Learning to commit also requires trust. Trust in yourself and trust in your ability to handle whatever follows. People often delay decisions because they want guarantees that things will turn out well, but guarantees don't exist. What you do have is the ability to adapt, to learn, and to grow from whatever comes. When you believe in that capacity, you no longer need certainty before choosing. You can move forward with faith in your resilience rather than fear of the unknown. The process of committing also means letting go of the seductive pull of alternatives. Human nature is to look back and imagine how the other option might have been easier, safer, or more rewarding. But these imagined versions are illusions because they only exist in your mind. The moment you commit to one choice, the others stop being real paths and become memories of possibilities. Constantly revisiting them only keeps you tied to an unreality that prevents you from fully engaging with the life you're actually building. Another challenge in this step is the pressure of external comparisons. You might see others making different choices and wonder if you've done something wrong. Comparison plants seeds of doubt that grow quickly if you're not careful. But their values, circumstances, and goals are not yours. Their decision may make sense for them, but it says nothing about whether your choice is right for you. Committing to your decision means resisting the temptation to measure it against someone else's journey. Committing to a choice doesn't mean you won't feel fear or doubt. Those feelings are natural, especially when the decision involves risk. But what changes is how you respond to them. Instead of letting fear dictate your actions, you acknowledge it as part of the process and continue forward anyway. Courage isn't the absence of doubt, it's the willingness to move ahead even when doubt whispers in your ear. Commitment gives you the strength to act in spite of the uncertainty. What many people don't realize is that commitment itself creates clarity. Once you decide and focus on one path, your mind stops scattering across countless options and begins to see opportunities and solutions you couldn't notice before. It's as though doors start appearing only after you've chosen to walk through one hallway. This clarity comes from the energy you free up when you stop dividing your attention. It's one of the most empowering rewards of making and sticking to a decision. Another benefit of commitment is that it makes you proactive instead of reactive. Instead of drifting along, hoping things will work out, you actively shape the outcome of your choice. Even if obstacles arise, you're more inclined to problem, solve, and adapt because you've taken ownership. This ownership transforms you from a passive observer of your life into an engaged participant who directs where things go. That sense of control strengthens your confidence, reinforcing your ability to make future decisions with less hesitation. Ultimately, the act of making a choice and fully committing to it turns decision making into a practice of self-trust. Each time you do it, you prove to yourself that you are capable of deciding, acting, and adjusting as needed. Over time, this builds a reservoir of confidence that makes future decisions easier. Instead of dreading them, you approach them with a grounded assurance that whatever happens, you'll navigate it. That's the freedom that comes from learning that confidence is not about knowing you're right, but about knowing you'll make it right as you go.